This is a permitting process for suction mining.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. And I want to particularly thank the committee for its very thorough review of this issue. I'm happy to work with the committee to incorporate the suggested amendments that are on page 6 of the analysis. SB 637 seeks to address a recent court ruling which found that California's regulatory program for suction dredge mining violated the Federal Supremacy Clause and the 1872 Mining Act because the Department of Fish and Wildlife does not have the authority to fully mitigate all the environmental impacts as directed by the legislature, and thus could not issue permits and lift the moratorium on suction dredge mining that we've had in place since 2009. So what this bill does is it empowers the State Water Resources Control Board, the Water Board, to use its regulatory powers under the Federal Clean Water Act to address the water quality issues associated with suction dredge mining. This addresses both the gap in regulator authority and clearly ensures that California's regulatory program is in line with federal protections. So, this is not a new issue to the legislature. We know and have discussed some of the environmental impacts of suction dredge mining. According to a 2003 study by the Water Board, the power equipment used by suction dredgers to vacuum up the stream beds can cause a plume of mercury-laden sediment to travel downstream, which of course can be harmful to both water quality, public health, endangered species, and cultural sites. In a letter to the Department of Fish and Wildlife from 2013, the board said that recreational suction dredging as a whole has disproportionately greater effect on mercury resuspension, which is like agitation and then redistribution of mercury, when compared to other natural events or human activities. And in fact, in 2011, the USGS, the Geological Survey, reported that miners mobilize and change toxic metals such as mercury that are currently buried under rocks and mud in our rivers through their activities. This action makes mercury more available for transformation into toxic methyl mercury, et cetera. So when the Department of Fish and Wildlife issued its final environmental impact report on suction dredge mining regulations in 2012, the department recognized that they did not have the authority to regulate impacts on public health, water quality, or cultural sites, and thus could not issue permits that guaranteed those protections, despite the legislature's requirement that it do so. They made the point at the time that other agencies, such as the State Water Resources Control Board, have jurisdiction over these impacts. So in January of this year, the San Bernardino Superior Court ruled that federal mining law preempted the department's regulations of suction dredge mining on federal land, since the department could not legally issue permits. The court commented that the state's laws relating to suction dredge mining needed clarification. By requiring the State Water Resources Control Board to regulate the discharge of pollutants into waterways resulting from suction dredge mining, as it regulates every other discharger under the Federal Clean Water Act, SB 637 addresses this ruling directly. It closes the gap in California's statutory framework regarding suction dredge mining by giving both the appropriate agency authority to deal with the water quality impacts and by ensuring suction dredge mining activity conforms to both state and federal protections. This is, of course, even more important now as our state is in the grip of our historic drought. We obviously need to protect water quality, and we've been talking quite a bit about water quality with previous bills here today. We had a hearing in the Natural Resources Committee. It passed out of committee, but we had a dialogue with some of the opponents, and I asked my staff to sit down with them, and they had a productive meeting. We're working on addressing two of their key concerns. One of them is that they asked us to give the Water Board a time frame for determining the waste discharge requirements, and also to allow the board to decide that no permit is necessary if that's what the board deems appropriate. There was a debate about the environmental impacts of suction dredge mining, and ultimately, this is not a ban on suction dredge mining at all. This is empowering the board to set standards, set environmental standards as it is associated with suction dredge mining. So these were both very reasonable requests, and we're working on them now. So I have Izzy Martin with the Sierra Fund and Craig Tucker with the Karuk Tribe to speak in support. Also, we have Carrie Monahan, who's the science director for the Sierra Fund, to assist in answering technical questions that might be relating to mercury contamination as it's relating to the mining. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Allen, and thank you, Senator Wachowski, and members of the committee for this opportunity to speak. My name is Izzy Martin. I'm the CEO of the Sierra Fund. The Sierra Fund's been working on the issue of suction dredge mining for about 10 years. We're participants in the Department of Fish and Wildlife's Public Advisory Committee around the suction dredge mining rules that were promulgated earlier this century. We have talked many times to suction dredge miners. Our concerns about suction dredge mining continue to be that there's a water quality component of the issue. Rather than speaking about that technically, I've brought with me Dr. Carrie Monahan, PhD hydrologist, that can talk in detail about, or at least in summary detail, about the specific science of the water quality issues at stake here.
Thank you.
Doctor?
Can everyone hear me? My name is Carrie Monahan. I'm the science director at the Sierra Fund. I'm also adjunct professor at CSU Chico State. Over the past 5 years, I've been studying mercury fate and transport from Malakoff-Diggins State Historic Park on Humbug Creek, which was once the largest and richest hydraulic mine in the world, and now is a beloved state park. It's estimated that almost 10,000 kilograms of mercury, liquid elemental mercury, was used at this site alone to be used in aiding in gold recovery processes. I'm going to reference two peer-reviewed pieces of scientific literature, both by USGS scientists. The first is The Effects of Sediment and Mercury Mobilization in the South Yuba River and Humbug Creek by Jacob Fleck et al. In 2010. The second is titled Mercury Bioaccumulation in Fish in a Region Affected by Historic Gold Mining, the South Yuba River, Deer Creek, and Bear River Watersheds by Jason May et al. In 1999. The first USGS study tested the effects of suction dredge on mercury at a hot spot on a hydraulic mine-impacted river, the South Yuba River. The study estimated that 100 hours of dredging with a single suction dredge could exceed a year's worth of total mercury loads. There were over 3,000 permits issued annually statewide prior to the moratorium in 2008. Obviously, not all suction dredgers are lucky enough to have access to a hot spot contaminated with gold and mercury. But that is their desired target, to find a hot spot where there is gold buried at the bottom of the riverbed. And with it, there is almost always buried legacy mercury that was once used in hydraulic and hard rock mining during the California gold rush. And it is exposed, re-exposed to the environment as a result of the modern day suction dredge miners' hard work. So the amount of mercury released by a suction dredge miner depends on where they are mining, how contaminated the area is from mining, how many hours they dredge for, and the size of their dredge nozzle. Once the silts and clays that are contaminated with mercury are liberated by the dredge, they can stay in suspension for a very long time, and they can travel great distances. And once mobilized, can redeposit in downstream reaches or reservoirs where the particulate-bound mercury can be methylated and incorporated into the aquatic food chain. The impact that re-released mercury has on the environment depends on when it is released, how much is released, what form it is released in, and where it lands. Most importantly, what we have learned from these peer-reviewed published studies is that seemingly low levels of mercury in sediment can become dangerously high levels in fish through a process called biomagnification. Over 90% of the anglers surveyed in a study conducted by the Sierra Fund from 2009 to 2011 reported that they ate fish that they or someone they knew caught. Bass fish in Combi and Camp Far West reservoirs on the Bear River have a do not eat fish advisory for women and children. Bass have been collected from these and other water bodies with over 1 part per million mercury, which exceeds the FDA action level, and many other species of fish are above the 0.3 part per million EPA screening level. Since the moratorium on suction dredge mining, the limited but published data we have suggests that methylmercury levels in macroinvertebrates, bugs that fish eat, has decreased, and this could be a very good sign. Look, as we learn more about the fate and transport of mercury, how it moves, when it moves, how it gets into our food chain, we have to be smarter about the practices we use. And my Aunt Bibby always said, you know better, you do better. And that is exactly what I'm here to implore you to do. Thank you for your time and consideration of this extremely important decision for our watersheds, our people, and our health.
Don't go away. We'll need, I'm going to have a question.
And we handed out her comments with their citations to the Sergeant at Arms.
Okay. Next witness.
Hi, my name's, well, first First of all, thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me here, Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you, Senator, for bringing this important issue to the table. My name is Craig Tucker. I'm the Natural Resources Policy Advocate for the Karuk Tribe. I would like to agree with Dr. Moynihan's Aunt Bibi that the more we know, the better and more informed decisions we can make. I represent the Karuk Tribe. The Karuk Tribe, with about 4,000 members, is probably the third largest tribe in California. And most anthropologists and linguists and Karuk themselves will tell you that they're among the first Californians. Their interaction with miners dates back to the original gold rush, to 1849, 1850. And that first interaction with miners was devastating for the Karuk people, just as it was for Indian people all over the state of California. And what we're experiencing today is, in some ways, a continuation of that first conflict. Suction dredge mining is having a big impact on Karuk tribal fisheries, Karuk tribal water quality, and cultural sites. And all that has been identified in an environmental impact report put together by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife Service or California Department of Fish and Wildlife as they promulgated new rules and regulations. However, what's been pointed out through a bunch of court cases, and the Karuk tribe has been tied up in litigation with both the state, U.S. Forest Service, and mining groups for about 10 years now, is that the way the laws have been written, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife lack the authorities to properly regulate this activity, which we now know can be dangerous for a variety of reasons. So we would advocate that it be clarified by SB 637 that the Federal Clean Water Act applies to small-scale motorized gold mining. Anyone else doing these kinds of activities, anyone else mining commercially to make a living, it's common and normal that you would have to get a permit to do these things, and it's common and normal that the State Water Board would be the agency that would offer those permits. I would just close by saying that the Karuk tribe historically and still today, subsistence fishing is a major part of both cultural practices and how people put food on their families' tables. So whether it's mercury contamination, adding sediment to the river that affects spawning and rearing of juvenile fish, I just can't overstate how important an issue this is for the Karuk tribe. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Others in support?
Andrew Grinberg, Clean Water Action, in support.
Eddie Moreno on behalf of Sierra Club California in support.
Okay, I have a question before we get to the jurisdiction issue. I need to understand this suction dredging a little bit better, because you talked about some variables of where they were, how many hours they were, the size of the nozzle, and I assume that all suction apparatus are not the same, right? So you're concerned in the two reports that you referenced, you're concerned about the disturbance. It's not what, I assume that you're sucking out what you want or maybe what you don't want, and the question is, where does that go? But is it the disturbance that you're concerned with, is the stuff around it that's not exactly sucked, or is it the sucked material?
It's both. It was really important to understand that suction dredge miners are very good at finding gold and mercury at the bottom of the rivers, and they'll remove a large amount of material to try and get to those pieces of pay dirt, areas where there's a high concentration in the clays and silts where the gold and mercury, because it's heavy, has settled out. Now, that's what they're looking for. They're out there to find that gold. So they're sucking that up, right? After moving some big rocks aside by hand, they're sucking that up to what equates as kind of an underwater vacuum cleaner, all right? So it's helping them suck that up. It goes into the tube, and what happens is that liquid elemental mercury, which sometimes can be seen with the naked eye, just like if you were to break a thermometer, you would see liquid elemental mercury, and it's quite something to see that at the bottom of the river, all right? Once it's sucked up, it becomes atomized or floured. It's broken up into a billion little pieces instead of one piece. That's what mercury does, right? And it goes right out the back end into the river, right? Now that oxygenated mercury, it is actually what we call reactive. It's in a reactive divalent form, which is more likely to be methylated. So it's more bioavailable for bacteria to use that mercury in their metabolic processes, thereby methylating it, making it part of the food chain. And with every step in the food chain, it can biomagnify 100,000, 10,000, so that you get very, very high levels in large predatory fish that live a long time and eat lots of smaller fish.
So one of the variables you were looking at was the timing of I assume there's this fall run of fish when salmon come back in and they want to lay their eggs. There's the spring runoff when we have lots of water coming through the tributaries and all that. Talk to me about
It's actually
some people may say there's no good time, but is there a better time, at least from a biological sense, for the disturbance?
Probably. It's a good question, but it's actually really simple in my mind. Winter storms move a lot of mercury. Rivers, when they're pumping, they move more than just water, right? They move dirt. They look brown, right? That's them moving particulate-bound mercury downstream, right? That's a large winter storm happening when it's cold and a lot of biological activity isn't happening very quickly. So that's a winter storm. That in comparison to a suction dredge miner who's probably out there in better conditions in the summertime and targeting hot spots and then dispersing that methylmercury downstream of them when biological activities of all kinds are thriving. Do you follow?
Right.
So the mercury methylation is very likely to take place when it's redistributed during the summer.
Okay. Let's hear from the opposition. We have the leaders or everybody. Who wants to speak first in opposition? Yeah. I have a binder. I know that.
I want to have Keith. Make sure we don't.
Okay, who's going to go first?
Hello, Mr. Chairman. My name is Shannon Poe, members of the Senate. I'm the president of American Mining Rights Association. I'm also a professional gold miner, have been for about the last 10 years. And we want to thank you for the opportunity to sit down and talk to you folks today. When we had the committee hearing 2 weeks ago, the good senator next to me got to present this information about mercury and methylization and everything for about 15 minutes. When we got up to present our side, we were actually shut down and weren't even allowed to present any information about mercury. So we appreciate this offer. That bill did pass through committee, by the way. But I want to address something that the doctor said this morning. We're going to talk about the percentages of mercury and suction dredge removal and things like that. But you got to understand is that she was talking about when the river flows in the wintertime, and I believe you brought that up, high water level, everything moves. The gold moves, the mercury moves, and there's far more turbidity created by Mother Nature than a suction dredge could ever create. Even if you put all the dredgers in California in one river, it still wouldn't equal one flood stage. So I want to make sure everybody understands that. After the last committee meeting, we set up a meeting with Senator Allen at his request, and he was stated on record and on film that he'd like to meet with me personally after we provided testimony. So I drove 3.5 hours from Yosemite to be up here to meet with the senator, and only to find out when we got here that the senator wouldn't meet with us. So we didn't get a chance to actually speak with Senator Allen about this. But simply put, Senate Bill 637 is in fact a scheme, and it's a scheme to further ban suction dredging in California. It's promoted by special interests with flawed and in some cases omitted data on mercury. And I want to focus on that for a second. Is the doctor talked about the mercury levels rising. In fact, if you look at the data that was provided by the study she quoted, there's 4 years of data in there that has been omitted that specifically and conclusively shows that suction dredging and over that period of time that she was talking about, that the mercury levels have actually changed. That because Since the dredge ban in 2008, they've fluctuated, and the mercury levels have actually risen since suction dredging has been banned since 2008. So I think it's very important to point that out. The EPA also labeled suction dredging as the most effective method of removing mercury from our waterways. And they label it as 98% effective. And I want to give you an analogy because I don't think that everybody understands what a suction dredge is. It's not some giant thing that you see on Gold Rush on TV. It's a very small thing. It runs off of typically a motor the size that you'd see on a lawnmower. And it works just like a vacuum cleaner, is that everybody would go and vacuum their carpet. Why? To remove the dirt, the sediment, the pollutants, things like that. It cleans it. And that's precisely what a suction dredge does. There's no giant turbines or anything in there that's going to grind up fish and spit blood out the back. That's just not the case. Fish and Wildlife, in fact, uses the same hose when they stock ponds, lakes, rivers, anything like that, to actually transport the fish from their tanks to the water. That's the same thing. It's just an open tube. It vacuums material from the bottom, and it kicks it out over the top of a sluice box, and it puts it right back into the ground. It's called, into the creek, it's called incidental fallback. There's no additives, there's no pollutants, there's nothing being added to it. But when you take into the account that a suction dredge, according to the EPA in these studies, removes 98% of the mercury, that's a good thing. Yes, there may be 2% that may get potentially methylated, but 2% as opposed to leaving it all in there, when the high water stage or a flood or a heavy rain is going to move all that mercury and methylate most of it.
Is that because the mercury is stuck on the gold? I'm stuck on the gold. It's probably not a...
There is, and that's called amalgamation, is mercury and gold are attractants. They're like magnets. But a lot of this mercury, and the old timers back in the 1850s, yeah, they used liquid mercury. It was wrong. They shouldn't have done it, but they didn't know what the hazards were. The simple fact is that a suction dredge goes out and it removes that mercury. It removes 98% of it. The dredge on the Lake Combi project by Sierra Fund right now is 84% effective, and it's costing us millions of dollars in taxpayer money in grants for them to remove this. Suction dredges go out, we already have a permitting process, it generates revenue for the state, and it doesn't cost anything. What's really lacking here is an effective mercury collection facility or a program that actually does that. It's something that we had hoped to talk to Senator Allen about, although that didn't happen. I think that Ms. Martin, she had used an analogy, or she used a story that she saw a miner or somebody was driving around with a big mayonnaise jar of mercury around in his truck. And that's just simply not the case, guys. We're professional miners. We've been underwater for years and years and years. We see this stuff. The dredges recover almost all of the mercury. So you have to ask yourself, is it a good thing or a bad thing? If you're removing 90% of a toxic pollutant from the waterways, is that a good thing? Well, of course it is. That's just common sense will tell you that.
Where do you put the mercury? I mean, I know where you put the gold. I follow that.
Yeah.
Okay, on that one.
We buried the gold.
The mercury, I mean, I assume that there's some process that separates them, but what do you do with this 98% of the, what characterizes disturbed mercury? Where do you guys put it?
That's a good question.
There's no place.
Is what happens is after you do what's called a cleanup at the end of the day with your dredge, you're left with basically gold and mercury and heavy materials. Lead, we remove almost 100% of lead fishing weights. As a matter of fact, at the last committee hearing, I showed a guy that dredged for 6 hours. He had 1,250 pounds of lead weights in one day.
That is actually
and it's actually in the book, but
1,250 pounds?
in one day with a 6-inch
Half a
dredge.
ton?
That's over half a ton.
That's a big truck.
That's a lot. But the problem is, and that identifies a specific issue here, is that there's no collection facility, there's no turn-in, there's no incentive for the miners to actually get rid of this stuff. So most of the people, like myself, because it is a valuable element. I mean, it's used in all kinds of
Thermometers.
yeah, thermometers, lights, all kinds of stuff.
Stop making hats with it. It's had a bad effect.
Mad Hatter. But a lot of us just keep that, and at the you know, at some point during the whatever life that you dredge is that you turn it into the EPA. And that's basically what most of us do. It's rather absurd to think that somebody drives around with a mayonnaise jar of mercury in their truck. That does not happen. So, but you could set up a collection facility in the rural areas, in the mother lode counties, with what's called a retort. And what a retort is it's a small device that you take that amalgamated gold and mercury, and it goes into a little cup. That gets heated, and the gold and the mercury that's collected together, that's amalgamated, you heat that up, and it actually atomizes it, or it turns it into a vapor, and then it gets cooled, and the mercury comes back out in its raw form, and the gold is left in the bottom of the cup. It's very environmental friendly, it's very safe. But that's the problem that we're all identifying here is there's no incentive for the miners to go turn that in. If there was a collection facility or, you know, pay them $10 or $15 an ounce for the stuff, you'd get all of these people to turn it in. And then they, you know, the state can do whatever they want. They can sell it to the industry,
They can use
whoever.
it for the compact fluorescent lights that the state is giving away by the millions.
Just one, let's.
So
witness.
anyway, we all want, and miners are very, very, I guess, environmentally friendly. We clean up hundreds of tons of trash and garbage off of our claims. We keep our public lands clean, and we're very proud of that fact. We all want sustainable waterways, fisheries, and recreation areas just like everybody else, but this bill absolutely hampers that. But I want to focus on the economic impact of this bill and the scheme of this bill. And that is that this bill, as well as the other bans on suction dredging, have devastated the lower and middle class. And you think about these rural communities and the literally hundreds of millions of dollars in the last 6 years that have not been spent in these communities because when suction dredgers go up there, they'll dredge for a week, or some people take a month off. I dredge year-round if I could, and we spend money in grocery stores and gas stations and hardware stores and RV parks and everything like that. There's businesses all through the mother lode that have had to close because of these schemes. These people are really hurting, and it's predominantly, if you look around in this room here and look at the demographics of the people here, they're not just, you know, young kids that are out doing this stuff. These are people that are relying on that income that they may be on Social Security, so they truly are lower and middle class folks. Another thing that we noticed is the language in this bill has just been changed from not deleterious, which is what the Department of Fish and Game EIR stated suction dredging does not do. We are not deleterious to anadromous fish, which we also need to point out, anadromous fish meaning salmon and steelhead, over 80% of the gold claims in California have no salmon because of the dams. It's important that everybody knows that. So they've changed this language to won't have significant impacts on fish and wildlife. So is that going to be another 6-year study? How many millions or tens of millions of dollars are we going to have to spend of taxpayer money to meet the criteria of that language? How many more jobs are going to be lost? How many more rural communities are going to be impacted by this? Who represents the lower and middle class? I thought it was you guys. So millions of dollars in grant money, which is taxpayer money, has been spent and given to people and companies like Ms. Martin's Sierra Fund to allow this dredge project on Lake Combetty. Their dredge removes 84% of the mercury. Our dredges, proven, have removed 98%. So now I just read in this morning's newspaper that they're moving to go and dredge the Bear River. That's obviously going to cost the taxpayers even more money. The simple fact is that suction dredgers with the permitting process already in place raise revenue for the state. We don't cost the state anything. It actually raises revenue. If we were to create a collection program, you know, pay people $15 for an ounce of mercury, the state could in turn sell that probably at a profit to whatever businesses or whatever manufacturing that they want. That's what's missing, is a policy conducive to the collection by the small-scale miners. We've proposed this stuff, like I say, to Senator Allen, but I want to explain one last thing here, and that is the soup pot theory. And this is a Supreme Court decision, and I'm going to use what Ruth Bader Ginsburg had stated in this. and that is about incidental fallback and what is labeled, as everybody's talking about, these pollutant discharge permits and things of that nature. Ms. Ginsburg, if I could borrow your cup here, sir, is her theory was this, and it's a case out of LA, is if you represent this cup as a river, if I dip a ladle into that and I lift it up, and let's say it's minestrone soup, and I pour that ladle back in there, am I adding any pollutant to that? Well, of course not. That's precisely what a suction dredge does. It moves the material from this portion of a river to this portion. But let's take it a step further, because you're removing 100% of the lead and you're removing 98% of the mercury. Common sense would tell you that that's a good thing. But the opposition to mining obviously disagrees with that. There's only one person here that's going to get rich off of this Senate Bill 637 scheme, and that's Izzy Martin and Sierra Fund. So we represent tens of thousands of suction dredgers in the state of California.
Let's just keep it on the merits of the bill.
Okay. So we represent tens of thousands of suction dredgers here in the state of California, and we vehemently oppose this bill.
Very good. Next witness.
My name is Chris Georgie. I would like to address some of the technical details. First, one thing that is interesting, in that Auburn Journal paper, which I have included just the printout of, you'll notice that the equipment that is being used by Sierra Fund for Combi is in fact stated, the Pegasus equipment uses suction dredging equipment to help remove mercury from sand and gravel. The new equipment provides a way to safely remove sediment and mercury from the sediment, he says. Furthermore, when it comes to an addition, where dredge spoils are considered, it in fact has been considered a pollutant. This is when dredge spoils are removed from one section, moved to another water body, and deposited, such as in San Francisco Bay. This was in fact a hampering navigation. That was the reason that was considered a pollutant. Same as trees floating down a river were considered a pollutant. It is also, there are a number of studies that have been shown that not only is mercury not methylated actively in the rivers, it is in fact actively demethylated as it is exposed to sunlight. I've included that study in here as well. The UV light is the most effective means of photodemethylization and can reach rates of 6 to 25% per day of the total concentration. Additionally, the microbes which methylate mercury, they do not thrive in aerobic conditions, which means those having oxygen. They only persist once you've gotten to a totally anoxic environment. I've also included a study in here which is for the oxidation of Lake Comanche to specifically remove the problems they had there forming hydrogen sulfide. It's the same bacteria that creates the methyl mercury. When you have a large flow in the wintertime, not only is it moving all of the material downstream, the armored layer in a high flood will in fact move, and there are boulders that could be the size of this table that will roll downstream without any interruption. The data that was referred to about the levels of mercury increasing, what has in fact happened is we have seen that the levels of mercury that are seen are directly correlated to the water year and how much flow there is. And there's no correlation to the dredging. The 2008, which was had a lower mercury level than we did in 2012. Also, I would like to direct your attention to the numerous images throughout the binder which show the materials which we collect from these rivers, including lead, mercury, trash, and all manner of materials that are all human introduced. We put them there, we can take them out.